My mill gave me a brand new red Mercedes-Benz S-Class for my birthday. Do you like IT? IT's the latest model. You should be grateful. But I never drove IT. My husband noticed. Why won't you drive IT? I smiled. Get in and see for yourself. Huh? He sat in the driver's seat and started the engine. His face froze. And then everything became clear. In a high-rise apartment in Manhattan, Amy Wilson sat at her desk, concentrating on a design project with a looming deadline. As the setting sun streaming through the window made her copper-colored hair shine, she was making final adjustments while working on her graphic tablet. Her workspace as a freelance graphic designer working from home was neat yet creatively stimulating. The sound of keys jangled and the front door opened as her husband Richard returned home. "I'm back, Amy," he called out in a slightly tired voice. "Welcome home." Amy turned around with a warm smile. "How was your day?" Richard loosened his tie and sank into the sofa. "The usual. 2 client meetings, 1 team meeting, and mountains of paperwork," he replied while pouring himself a glass of water. "How about you?" "I've nearly finished the logo design for the new client." Amy proudly showed him her work. "With a few more adjustments, I should be able to submit it tomorrow." Richard had built a successful career as a sales manager at a major insurance company. Tall with an imposing physique yet a gentle personality, he was trusted by both his workplace colleagues and clients. He had met Amy 5 years ago at a party hosted by a mutual friend, and fell in love at first sight. He was captivated by Amy's straightforwardness and creativity, and she was drawn to Richard's sincerity and kindness. Their married life was generally smooth. While cherishing their careers, they occasionally discussed having children in the future. The only shadow over their relationship was Richard's mother, Beverly. "Oh, by the way, Mom called," Richard said casually, missing how Amy's expression slightly clouded. "She was talking about your birthday next week. She says she has a special gift for you." Amy tried to maintain her smile. "How thoughtful of her," she said with a faint tension in her voice. It had been 15 years since Beverly lost her husband John. While outwardly elegant and sophisticated, she possessed a sharp intellect and strong will beneath the surface. Her only son Richard was the center of her life, and she believed no one could take her son's affection away from her. From the beginning of Richard and Amy's marriage, Beverly had been cold toward Amy. While acting polite on the surface, it was clear to Amy that Beverly saw her as the woman who stole her son. Through small criticisms, sarcastic remarks, or overly kind gestures, Beverly always found ways to make Amy uneasy. "Mom really seems to want to improve her relationship with you," Richard said in a hopeful voice. "This gift might be a sign of reconciliation." Amy suppressed a sigh. Richard always tried to see the best in his mother. It was one of his virtues, but sometimes it blinded him. "Perhaps," she answered. "Did she tell you what the gift is?" "She said it's a secret. But she mentioned you'll be surprised." Amy smiled despite her anxiety. Beverly's surprises usually made her uncomfortable in some way. But for Richard's sake, she continued to maintain her composure. "I'm looking forward to it," she said. On her birthday, relatives and friends gathered at Amy and Richard's home for an intimate party. Though nervous, Amy felt reassured being surrounded by friends in her own apartment. Around 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang, and when Richard opened the door, there stood Beverly. With perfectly set silver hair and dressed in an expensive tweed suit, she exuded the dignity of a queen. "Thank you for coming," Richard embraced her. "Of course I'd come. It's Amy's special day," Beverly replied smoothly and turned to Amy. "Happy birthday, Amy." She kissed her on the cheek. The scent of her perfume was strong and almost suffocating. "Thank you, Beverly," Amy replied politely. "Now everyone," Beverly raised her voice to capture the attention of the entire room. "Let's all go outside to see my gift for Amy. Everyone come along." People followed her with curiosity and went out to the street in front of the apartment. There, a brand new red Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked, gleaming in the sunlight. Amy gasped. It was undoubtedly a magnificent car. But at the same time she couldn't help feeling the intention of showing off and control behind Beverly's gift. "Do you like it?" Beverly asked in a sweet voice. "It's the latest model. I had it specially ordered." As the people around them expressed their admiration, she handed Amy the keys. "You should be grateful," she said with a smile, though the words carried the tone of a command. "It's wonderful." "Thank you," Amy responded as expected by those around her. While complex emotions swirled inside, she maintained the smile she had cultivated as a professional designer. Richard's face was beaming with surprise and joy. "This is really amazing." He embraced Beverly again. "Amy, what do you think? Isn't it wonderful?" Amy looked at the car, feeling a vague uneasiness. What was behind this lavish gift? "Yes, it's unbelievable," she answered honestly. Indeed, it was unbelievable that Beverly Wilson would give something without expecting anything in return. A week after the birthday party, Amy returned from shopping in her compact car and looked up at the gleaming red Mercedes-Benz parked next to her in the apartment parking lot. That car, which she had never driven, continued to shine like a red warning light at the corner of her vision. Carrying heavy shopping bags in both hands, Amy headed toward the elevator and thought. Richard had already asked several times about why she wasn't using his mother's gift. Each time she had made excuses like "my current car is fine," or "it takes time to get used to it." She couldn't tell him the real reason she didn't believe this gift came from genuine goodwill. Back in the apartment, there was a message from Richard on the answering machine. "I'll be late tonight. I have a dinner with clients. Don't worry. Love you." Amy put down her shopping bags and looked down at the red Mercedes through the window. She thought this was her chance. "I have time to check out that car." Determined, Amy went back down to the parking lot. She took out the keys and approached the car. After making sure there were no eagle-eyed surveillance cameras, she didn't think Beverly would go that far, but just to be safe, she opened the driver's door. Sitting inside, the smell of luxury leather hit her nose. Everything looked perfect: the shine of the dashboard, the texture of the seats, the sophisticated design of the control panel. But when she inserted the key into the ignition and started the engine, she felt something was off. The engine sound seemed slightly irregular. A faint vibration traveled through the steering wheel to her hands. Amy, with no experience of luxury cars, couldn't judge whether this was normal. "It might just be my imagination," she thought. "I'm not a Mercedes expert after all." As she explored the dashboard menu, various functions caught her eye. When she tried to check the navigation system and open the settings screen, she found that a user profile had already been set up: Beverly Wilson. "Of course," Amy muttered. "A new car, yet she's already entered her own information." Driven by curiosity, Amy examined the navigation history. It contained addresses for Beverly's home, Amy and Richard's apartment, and several luxury shopping malls. Investigating further, she discovered a vehicle tracking option in the system settings. It was enabled. "What's this?" Amy's brows furrowed. Reading the explanation, she learned that this feature sent the car's location information in real time to a specific smartphone application. The linked account name was B. Wilson. Uneasiness began to spread. Amy explored the settings further and found a recording function option. This too was enabled, set to automatically record conversations inside the car and send them to the same account. "Oh my God," Amy breathed. This was no longer a mere coincidence. Beverly had intended to monitor her and Richard. With trembling hands, Amy opened the glove compartment and took out the car's manual. Flipping through the hundreds of pages, she searched for information about the normal condition of the engine. It stated, "The S-Class engine is especially known for its quietness, with almost no vibration felt at idle." The vibration she had felt was clearly abnormal. Amy listened carefully to the engine again. Indeed, a slight, irregular sound could be heard. To investigate further, Amy took out her smartphone and searched for Mercedes-Benz S-Class engine abnormality. Reading several forums, she learned that engine troubles could lead to serious problems. Next, she checked the vehicle information screen on the dashboard to verify the car's history. What she discovered was shocking. This car wasn't new. The sale date was 6 months ago. "This can't be," Amy said aloud. Beverly had claimed it was the latest model and that she had specially ordered it. To investigate further, Amy noted down the car's VIN and accessed an automobile history report service on her smartphone. After paying the fee with her credit card and downloading the report, the terrible truth was revealed. The car was actually used and had an accident history. The previous owner had an accident on the highway, causing serious damage to the front end. It had been repaired, but crucial parts of the engine hadn't been completely restored. The report warned, potential for serious problems during long-distance or high-speed driving. Amy's hands trembled. This wasn't just a generous gift. Beverly had given her a dangerous car and intended to monitor her movements. In the worst case, this car could involve Amy in a serious accident. She turned off the engine and got out of the car. As the cool night air caressed her face, Amy thought about how to tell Richard about this horrifying discovery. He deeply loved his mother. Would he believe such a conspiracy? Back in the apartment, Amy decided to start gathering evidence. She took photos, printed the report, and captured screenshots of the recording function and tracking system settings. She would need irrefutable evidence to show Richard the truth. That night, lying in bed, Amy stared at the ceiling. Now that she knew the true purpose of Beverly's gift, she had to act to protect herself and her husband. But she still needed to proceed cautiously. She had to find a way to escape this dangerous situation without hurting Richard's feelings. On a weekend morning, Richard stood by the window with a coffee in hand, looking down at the parking lot. His eyes fell on the red Mercedes-Benz bathed in the morning sunlight. He took a slow sip of coffee, deep in thought. "It's strange," he turned to Amy, who was sitting on the sofa. "It's been 2 weeks since we received that car, and you haven't driven it once." Amy looked up from her laptop screen and chose her words carefully. "Yes, I still need time to get used to it. Mom has been calling almost every day." Richard sat down on the sofa next to Amy, asking, "Does Amy like the car? Is there any problem? She seems concerned." Amy took a deep breath. For the past few days, she had been calculating the timing to tell Richard the truth. The evidence she had gathered was irrefutable: the car's accident history, the engine problems, and most terrifyingly, the surveillance system installed in the car. But considering Richard's relationship with his mother, bringing up this issue was difficult. "Beverly probably thinks I'm happy with the car," Amy said cautiously. "But you're not, are you?" Richard looked straight into Amy's eyes. "There's something you're not telling me. Lately you've seemed uneasy, and even more tense when it comes to my mother." Amy clenched her jaw. "Richard, there's a problem with that car." "A problem?" What kind of problem? It's easier to show you than explain. Amy stood up. Let's go to the car. They descended to the parking lot in silence. Amy's heart was pounding. She understood that what was about to happen might change Richard's life forever. Standing in front of the red Mercedes in the parking lot, Amy took out the keys. Get in and see for yourself, she said. Richard, with a skeptical expression, opened the driver's door. What exactly am I looking for? Start the engine first, Amy said as she sat in the passenger seat. Richard inserted the key into the ignition and started the engine. He wasn't a driving expert, but he had opportunities to ride in luxury cars for work and knew the normal condition of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. His expression began to cloud. The sound is strange, he said. I can feel vibrations too. Yes, that's not the sound of a new car, Amy said. Especially for a luxury car. Richard placed his hand on the steering wheel, frowning as he felt the subtle vibrations of the engine. It's definitely off. But Mom said it was new. Let's start with that. Amy took out her smartphone and opened the vehicle history report she had saved. Look at this. Richard took the smartphone and stared at the screen. Amy could see the color draining from his face. His voice trembled. This car has an accident history. And it says it was sold 6 months ago. Yes, it's not a new car but a used one that's been repaired after an accident, Amy said quietly. Important parts of the engine weren't properly repaired. It's dangerous for long-distance driving. Richard looked at Amy with disbelief. How could this happen? That's not all. Amy reached for the dashboard screen and opened the navigation system settings. Look at this. The settings screen displayed Beverly Wilson profile with vehicle tracking and voice recording enabled. Richard's expression froze. He stumbled over his words. This is a surveillance device. Yes, all conversations in this car are set to be recorded and sent to Beverly's account, Amy said. And the car's location information is constantly being sent to her smartphone. Richard's hands fell from the steering wheel onto his knees. He stared out the window, seemingly trying to organize his thoughts. Why would Mom? He was at a loss for words. Amy took her husband's hand. Richard, I don't want to accuse Beverly. But this is clearly intentional. Giving an accident car disguised as new, and monitoring our movements and conversations. Anger began to color Richard's face. This is unacceptable. It's clear that Mom lied. But I can't believe it. Why would Mom do something like this? I don't know that either, Amy answered honestly. But this car isn't safe, and our privacy is being violated. I think we should have it examined by a professional. Richard turned off the engine and sighed deeply. Let's take it to an independent repair shop immediately, without telling Mom anything. As they were leaving the car and heading back to the apartment, Richard suddenly stopped. How long have you known about this? A few days, Amy replied. I was struggling with how to tell you. I didn't want to ruin your relationship with Beverly. Richard placed his hand on Amy's shoulder. You did the right thing. This is shocking, but I needed to know the truth. Determination shone in his eyes. If Mom really did this, I'll have to reconsider my relationship with her. While riding the elevator, Richard quietly said, Since childhood, Mom has been deeply involved in my life. I thought she was overprotective at times, but I never expected her to go this far. He managed a bitter smile. Mom always had high standards for my marriage partner, but I chose you, and I'm still proud of that choice. Amy squeezed her husband's hand. We'll get through this together. Back in the apartment, Richard picked up the phone and contacted a reputable local auto repair shop. I'd like you to look at a car first thing tomorrow morning. Would that be possible? He didn't explain the details, simply stating there were safety concerns. After hanging up, Richard gazed at Amy and smiled sadly. I'm thankful you didn't drive the car. If anything had happened, Amy nestled against her husband, resting her head on his arm. What are we going to do now? First, we need to get an accurate assessment of the car's condition, Richard said with determination. Then, a conversation with Mom. The evening light streamed through the window, bathing the room in a red glow. That red light reminded them of the dangerous gift parked in the lot below. The next morning, Amy and Richard woke up early and drove the red Mercedes to Morrison Auto Repair Shop. It was a reputable independent shop that Richard had called for an appointment. Both were quiet, anxious about what might happen. Upon arrival at the repair shop, an older gentleman with elegant gray hair greeted them. I'm Tom Morrison. The one you called, he said, extending his hand. Richard Wilson. And this is my wife Amy, Richard responded nervously. We're concerned about this car. Morrison studied the red Mercedes with dignified eyes. What symptoms are you experiencing? The engine sound is odd, Amy explained. And we'd like to confirm if this is really a new car. Morrison raised an eyebrow but asked no further questions, getting straight to work. Let's start with a computer diagnosis. Then we'll take a closer look at the engine. Amy and Richard waited in the shop's office space. Coffee cup in hand, Richard stared out the window. I can't believe my mother would do something like this, he finally spoke. Especially something that would put your safety at risk. Amy placed her hand over his. We can't say anything for certain yet. Let's wait for Mr. Morrison's diagnosis. About an hour later, Morrison returned to the office. His expression was grim, and he held a detailed diagnostic report in his hand. I have something I need to tell you both, he said as he sat down. This car is not new. It's been at least 9 months since manufacture. Richard leaned forward. And the condition of the engine? Morrison sighed deeply. To be frank, it's dangerous. The engine mounts have been improperly repaired, and several critical components aren't original parts. With high speed or extended use, the engine could completely fail. In the worst case, it could stop while driving, potentially causing a serious accident. A chill ran down Amy's spine. This was exactly what she had suspected. Morrison continued, I also found unusual electronic devices in the car. He produced another document. A surveillance device linked to the navigation system. It's quite sophisticated, not something an amateur would install. The color drained from Richard's face. So it was deliberately installed. Without a doubt, Morrison nodded. These kinds of devices aren't typically installed by used car dealerships. Someone must have specially ordered it. Amy saw Richard's expression harden. There was a complex mix of anger and sadness there. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, Richard said quietly. Could we have this in writing? The detailed diagnosis and its dangers. Morrison showed understanding. I also recommend leaving the car here until you decide what to do with it. It shouldn't be driven in this condition. After leaving the keys with Morrison and riding the elevator back, Richard suddenly punched the wall. Why? His voice trembled with anger and sadness. Why would Mom do something like this? Amy embraced her husband. She had no answers. She could only support his wounded heart. I need to see my mother, Richard said in a voice of firm resolve. Right now. That afternoon, Amy and Richard headed to Beverly's luxury apartment. In the car, Richard maintained silence, and Amy didn't disturb his thoughts. Upon arriving at Beverly's building, the doorman greeted them in the entrance hall. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, welcome, he said cheerfully. Shall I announce you to Mrs. Wilson? No, it's a surprise, Richard forced a smile. Mother will be delighted to see us. They took the luxurious elevator to the top floor and stood in front of Beverly's penthouse door. Richard rang the doorbell, and soon Beverly herself opened the door. Richard! Amy! What a lovely surprise, she said, feigning delight. However, her eyes quickly noticed the stern expressions on their faces, and her smile faded. Is something wrong? Let's talk inside. Richard's voice was cold. Beverly anxiously led them to the living room. Shall I make some tea? No thank you, Amy quietly replied. Once the three were seated on the sofa, Richard took out Morrison's diagnostic report. Mom, we need to talk about the car you gave Amy as a present. Beverly tensed momentarily but quickly composed herself. That wonderful car. Did Amy like it? You said it was new. Richard looked straight into her eyes. Of course, Beverly smiled. I specially ordered the latest model. Richard placed the diagnostic report in front of her. That's a lie. His voice trembled. It's not a new car but a used one with accident history. The engine is in a dangerous condition and could cause a serious accident during long-distance driving. Beverly's expression froze for a moment. That can't be. I bought it from an authorized dealer. That's not all, Amy said quietly. Surveillance devices have been installed in the car, set to record all conversations and send them to your smartphone. Beverly's face changed color. That's ridiculous. She stood up. I just wanted to give a nice present. Richard also stood up, facing his mother. Enough, Mom. All the evidence is right here. He produced additional documents. These are the car's purchase records. You bought this car from a used car dealer and had surveillance devices installed after it was repaired. The color drained from Beverly's face. She collapsed back onto the sofa and remained silent for a while. Finally, she looked up. There was a coldness in her eyes that they had never seen before. You deserve a better woman, she said to Richard. This woman is manipulating you. Mom! Richard could no longer contain his anger. Amy is my wife. And you're the one who put her life in danger. That car is perfectly safe, Beverly argued. It might have some issues but nothing fatal. Not fatal? Amy said in disbelief. Mr. Morrison said the engine could stop while driving at high speed. So what? Beverly's voice suddenly turned cold. I just wanted to eliminate her, making it look like an accident. A terrible silence fell over the room. Richard stared at his mother, trying to comprehend her words. You tried to kill me. Amy's voice was faint. Beverly shrugged. I didn't think that far. I just thought you might get scared and stop driving the car. Then it would become Richard's. She smiled at Richard. It was for you, son. Richard's face showed horror and disgust. This is the end, Mom, he said in a trembling voice. Our relationship ends here. Richard. Beverly hurriedly stood up. You're my only son. You'd abandon me for this woman? Amy is not this woman, Richard said quietly but firmly. She is my wife and my life partner. And now that you've tried to hurt her, I can no longer call you mother. Beverly's face contorted. You'll regret this, she threatened. She's not worthy of you. Goodbye, Mom. Richard took Amy's hand. Don't contact us. We'll talk through lawyers. As they headed for the door, Beverly threw out a final remark. I just wanted to protect you, Richard. But Richard didn't look back. As they got into the elevator and the doors closed, he let out a long sigh. It's over, he said in a tired voice. Amy rested her head on her husband's shoulder. Are you okay? No, not at all, Richard answered honestly. But things will get better from now on. He squeezed Amy's hand. Let's get through this together. As they left the building, a soft sunset embraced them. 1 year later, Amy and Richard were having breakfast in the backyard of their new suburban home. The gentle morning light illuminated the flowers in the garden, and the chirping of birds sounded pleasant. More coffee? Richard asked, pot in hand. Thank you. Amy smiled and held out her cup. Her rounded belly told of the new life growing within her. Their daughter was due to be born in 2 months. Richard gently placed his hand on his wife's belly, smiling at the faint movements he could feel. Full of energy. Yes, she moves around regardless of whether it's midnight or morning, Amy laughed. Just like you. Their lives had changed dramatically over the past year. After the confrontation with his mother, Richard began seeing a psychological counselor to address his relationship with his mother. Understanding the boundary between a mother's love and control wasn't easy, but therapy was helping him gradually overcome past suffering. They had moved into their new home 6 months ago. Leaving their Manhattan apartment for a spacious house with a garden marked a fresh start. Amy continued her design work from home while preparing for the baby's arrival. Richard worked at the same company but had begun to prioritize work-life balance. I'll finish painting the baby's room this afternoon, Richard said while taking a bite of toast. The combination of lilac and cream was a brilliant idea. As a designer, I pride myself on it, Amy winked. That room will be perfect. Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Richard looked at the screen and his expression tensed slightly. It's from Mom. Amy studied her husband's expression. His relationship with Beverly remained complicated. Since the incident, Richard had kept his distance but couldn't completely cut ties, maintaining just a monthly phone call. On the advice of professionals, he had decided to maintain limited contact. Richard answered the phone. After a brief conversation, he put it down. Mom says she wants to send something for the baby, he said with a complex expression. That's Amy chose her words. Don't worry, Richard took his wife's hand. I won't let Mom manipulate us again. If she sends anything, I'll check it first. Amy nodded, reassured. Beverly seemed to have softened her attitude somewhat upon learning of her grandchild's existence. However, Amy still didn't fully trust her. I know you'll protect me and our child, she said quietly. Richard embraced his wife. We're a family. There will still be difficulties ahead, but we'll overcome them together. The morning sun rose higher, announcing the start of a new day. Though the shadows of the past hadn't completely disappeared, Amy and Richard continued to walk forward, and the new life soon to be born would bring them new hope and joy.